Hello, I'm Montse Alvarado, and this is EWTN News in Depth.
We ought to care for the clergy, and we cannot simply change parishes, looking for one where everything runs perfectly.
A German father raising his family by the tenets of the Catholic Church speaks out as many German bishops defy Catholic Church teaching. What an apparent clergy revolt could mean as its influence spreads around the globe. The impact on the Church Universal, next.
Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity.
The President of the United States delivers his first joint address to Congress, analysis from a religious perspective. A new legal challenge to a religious exemption in federal law could have a dramatic impact on the campuses of religious universities. We talk to leaders of two prominent Catholic colleges. And history lives on at the shrine of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. A woman inspired by America's first saint shares her faith journey. EWTN News in Depth is next.
The Declaration of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith wasn't anything new. In fact, it only clarified the position of the Catholic Church's teachings and encouraged people to deal with this topic anew.
A German priest defends Catholic Church teaching on the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman, while many German bishops push back against the Vatican in support of blessing same-sex unions. It's a bitter split which some say mirrors larger divisions within the Church Universal. On March 14th, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in Rome issued a letter affirming Catholic teaching that marriage is between a man and a woman. The issue is reaching a near crisis point in Germany, where some clergy are already giving same-sex blessings and plan to do more in the coming days in defiance of the Vatican. The managing director of EWTN Germany, Martin Rottweiler, reports.
The Cologne Cathedral endured the Protestant Reformation and survived 14 hits from an aerial bombing during World War II. It has become the symbol of strength for the Roman Catholic faith. Now, the Church in Germany's faithfulness to the Bishop of Rome is being tested again.
A group of German-speaking priests, theologians and lay people have opposed the teaching of the Church and launched a so-called Day of Blessing, inviting priests to bless same-sex couples on May 10th. In a statement on their website, they say, "We are not accepting exclusionary and outdated sexual morality being played out on the backs of people and undermining our work in pastoral care." The two conflicting perspectives have led to division and an atmosphere of confusion among the Catholics in Germany. Father Daniel Sluminski, a youth pastor from the Archdiocese of Cologne, says that the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith's letter didn't create new division, but rather exposed an older divide that has been present since St. Pope Paul VI's encyclical Humanae Vitae.
The split, or the schism, has become more and more apparent, which means for us that we have to rely even more on the catechism.
Father Sluminski says that some see the Church's teaching as something negative. He's working to show the beauty and importance of the catechism for young people.
The Catholic Church's teaching on sexual morality and human love is a beautiful gospel. It shows people the way. It is like traffic signals, rules of the road, which can restrict and give warnings. But it is not discrimination.
Benno Schwaderlapp, a member of the parish council, says that one day he found a rainbow flag hanging outside of his parish, which he felt was emphasizing the divide.
Ein Pfarreiwechsel ist in Deutschland erstmal sehr unüblich, weil man...
He wrote an email to the parish priest explaining his reasons why it should be taken down.
Wir sind römisch-katholisch und römisch-katholisch.
We are Roman Catholics in Germany, in the German language. And the bond with the Holy Father is what will keep us in the truth through every schism. And it's what will keep us faithful to the Lord.
Treue zum Herrn bewahren wird.
As a German lay Catholic and father of 2 children, Benno Schwaderlapp says that Catholic moral teaching guides his family life.
Dass wir für ihn beten müssen, dass wir...
Yes, it has its points that make life more difficult. But in the end, it fulfills life in its entirety and makes it happy, rich, and joyful. And the Lord does not give us these morals that the Church interprets from His Word to test us. but he wants us to have a fullness of life. These morals bring this fullness. And I would also like to pass this on to my children.
Und das möchte ich auch meinen Kindern weitergeben.
Aware of the problems in the Church in Germany, Pope Francis in 2019 wrote to German Catholics calling for them to place the need for evangelization at the center of the Church's mission. He warned them of the risks of making changes too quickly, which he said will move them farther away from solving problems.
The Archbishop of Cologne, Cardinal Rainer Maria Wölki, expressed his faithfulness to Rome, fully embracing his title as Bishop of the Cathedral Church of St. Peter in Cologne.
Martin Rothweiler in Cologne, Germany for EWTN News in Depth.
Martin joins us now from our EWTN offices in Cologne, Germany. Martin, does the document from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith actually ban the blessing of gay Catholics?
No, it doesn't ban the blessing of a gay Catholic. It just only bans and denies the blessing of the union. And that's a big difference. That it's important to make this difference, which is very often misrepresented. So I think, and it's clear because, I mean, you cannot, a blessing is a sacramental, and you cannot ask like the blessing or a grace on something that contradicts what God designed and is kind of inscripted or inscribed in the creation.
That's very helpful and very clear. Then what is then the German Bishops' Conference saying about the May 10 initiative to bless these same-sex unions?
I mean, at first it states also that we welcome individuals with homosexual tendencies and they have a place in the church. They distance a little bit themselves from the initiative because they say, okay, a blessing service is something that should not be used for public manifestation. But at the same time, the president of the Bishops' Conference restated what he said right as a reaction to that document from Rome, saying that it blatantly kind of ignores or closes its mind to the progress of the knowledge of theology and human science. And I mean, that's something which is really different from what the Church teaches. So, and we have a big divide between bishops in Germany and faithful in Germany on this issue and on several other issues.
Really quick, public manifestation, you mean using this event and this blessing as a public protest to counter what church teaching actually is?
Exactly. That's the meaning of these, public manifestations, blessings, so that people or same-sex couples are invited to receive a blessing that day. And I think Bishop Oster, I mean, there are bishops naturally who are totally against that, like Bishop Oster, and he criticizes the lack of respect regarding the magisterium. And I think he quotes Chesterton in a very nice way, this bishop, and he says, okay, Chesterton said, I don't need a church that tells me what I'm not allowed to do, which is wrong, which I know that is wrong, but I need a church that tells me what is wrong if I think it's right.
Thank you so much, Martin. We'll be watching this closely. As we've discussed, the controversial moves by church leaders in Germany stand in direct opposition to Catholic teaching. These stances have been bubbling through a series of conferences in the Catholic Church in Germany that church leaders there are calling the synodal way or synodal path. The Synodal Way in Germany is 4 conferences that cover 4 main topics: the power and separation of powers in the church, sexuality and partnership, priestly life and celibacy, and women in church ministries and offices. The final conference is planned to wrap up in February of 2022. Here to explain more is Father Thomas Petrie, Dean and Acting President of the Dominican House of Studies. Father Petrie, let's start off. Tell us the difference between what the Germans claim is the synodal path and what Pope Francis is asking the bishops to do. Because what the Germans are doing is not a real synodal path according to Pope Francis, right?
That's right. It seems that way. That seems to be the indication that we've been getting from the Holy Father. I think of his 2019 letter to the German Catholics. Synods were initially gatherings of churches in dioceses or local regions to address, more often than not, historically theological issues and real theological debates. Whereas what seems to be happening in Germany is more of a Reformation sort of synod or a synodal way that is looking to reform various structures of the church. What the Holy Father has, on the contrary, asked for is for Germans to focus on interior renewal, evangelization, and most importantly, with regard to the synod, not to focus on changing the church or church structures according to modern mentalities. This is something we see Pope Francis preach quite a bit, that simply the changing of structures is not enough to solve our problems or to answer our questions.
So let's get into that. The first major document of the synodal path on separation of powers in the church seems to say outright that church doctrine should be subject to a vote by the faithful and that bishops should have term limits. Why is that dangerous?
Well, first of all, the faith and the teaching is not simply a matter of democratic vote. It's not simply the matter of a majority. I look back to the 4th century during the Arian crisis when a vast majority of priests and lay people didn't even believe that Jesus Christ was God. Perhaps if we had had a vote then, we wouldn't believe what we believe today. Rather, church teaching comes from a theological development, but ultimately based on what God himself has revealed to the apostles in the fullness of what we call the apostolic deposit, which is to say that everything that has been revealed or everything that Christ has revealed is everything that ever will be revealed. And anything that is taught that is not contained, at least seminally, in the apostolic deposit, namely in scripture, in tradition. I would also add, as part of tradition, how the church has worshiped and prayed from the beginning is in fact a corruption and not an authentic development. We don't treat the modern world or human experience as another avenue of revelation. Rather, it's our experiences and our lives that have to be configured to revelation, not the other way around, if that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense. And let's get into the apostolic deposit then, the roots of this current controversy about marriage. Where does church teaching on same-sex unions come from? And why can the church not bless these unions, but can bless the individuals?
Well, church teaching always comes from faith and reason. From faith primarily, once again, what God has revealed, both in scripture and tradition. So we know that God has created man and woman, and that marriage is a created reality by God. And in the suffering, death, and resurrection of Christ, that created natural reality of marriage is elevated to a sacramental, supernatural reality that confers grace and holiness. But we also know it through reason, through simply looking at human nature, not only the complementarity of male and female, but also the necessity of progeny, of having children, and not only having biological children and creating children, but also in raising children. This goes all the way back to the first millennium, that children need a father and mother. This was not only a Christian viewpoint, this was a human viewpoint. And so when we look at same-sex unions, we're looking at a union that is not only contrary to the faith, we're also looking at a union that is contrary to nature, and which is why it can't be blessed. I mean, as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith said, the union itself implies a certain contrariety to God's design and is therefore sinful. And while the church certainly does bless individuals, it does not bless sinful activities or anything that is engaged in a sinful activity or leads to a sinful activity. And so this is where the church's teaching comes from, and this is why we can't bless homosexual unions.
And so if we know where our church teaching comes from, how do we know when church teaching can be changed? Is this a moment where we're going to see something change? Church teaching doesn't change in this sense. It only develops. And so but even that word is often misused in a lot of Catholic media and by a lot of, I'm sorry to say, even some theologians, because the development always has to be a true organic development, which is to say it's a teaching that is found at least seminally in the early church among the apostles, even if it's not written in scripture. It was something that was prayed. The Assumption of Mary is a good example. I mean, we always prayed, even before the dogma was declared, we always prayed that something and celebrated the death of Mary, that she fell asleep, that something different happened at the end of her time on earth. All of that sort of develops naturally into an articulated dogma that is then defined. But any teaching that is in fact contrary to what has gone before and can be shown to be explicitly contrary is in fact a rupture and not an authentic teaching. But the teachings don't change in that sense. They develop, and any teaching that is not a development but is a corruption is in fact a false teaching. Quickly, last question. You use the word rupture. These moves by church leaders in Germany, they're reminiscent of similar moves made during the Protestant Reformation. Are we leading into another schism? When else have we seen something like this?
Well, one hopes not. I mean, schisms have happened even since the Protestant Reformation. I think about the Feeneyite schism in America, suggesting in which a group of people believed that salvation outside the church was literal. We had to they had to be reconciled. Schisms happen all the time or frequently. Is Germany leading to schism? I can't say on that. That's really, it seems the Holy Father is doing everything he can to challenge the German Catholics, German bishops, and the lay faithful to stay true to the universal church. And I'm edified that the president of the German Bishops' Conference, even though he's leading this synodal path, has insisted that Germany will always be part of the universal church. That gives me hope that when push comes to shove, there would not be a schism, but this is only by God's grace.
It gives us hope for our brothers and sisters in Germany. Thank you, Father Petri. We'll likely reach out to you again once the last conference of the Synodal Way happens to get your input. What does all of this mean for the Catholic Church in America? And what impact do these challenges have for the Church Universal? We'll bring that home next.
If this lawsuit were successful, those schools simply could not enforce those codes of conduct any longer.
And later, the potential blow to religious campuses on their teaching about marriage and the family if a legal challenge to Title IX succeeds.
Don't make your faith just on Sundays. Live it every day.
And we introduce you to a woman living her faith in the model of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. EWTN News in Depth is coming right back. Welcome back to EWTN News in Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. We continue our coverage on the controversial moves by church leaders in Germany to bless same-sex unions and its many implications. To give us a better understanding of how things are unfolding in Germany and what this could mean for the church in the U.S., we asked editor-in-chief of the Catholic news agency in Germany, A.C. Wimmer, to weigh in today, as well as EWTN News executive editor and D.C. bureau chief Dr. Matthew Bunson. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. A.C., you're on the scene in Germany. From what you've heard, what is the average German Catholic's reaction to all of this?
Look, whilst it's hard to generalize, unfortunately, some surveys indicate an amount of indifference that is even baffling to people who don't go to church every Sunday. Over 60%, according to a more recent survey, in fact, do not care what the controversial Synodal Way is doing and saying. If you ask practicing Catholics, though, on an anecdotal level, I think you'll find that a few of them are very concerned, in particular the fear that there might be a schism or something like that happening here in Germany.
And the composition of the church is increasingly migrant, right? So does this Synodal Way reflect their interests and concerns?
The question of inclusivity is one that's burning, as people have acknowledged, in particular on the Central Committee of Lay Catholics, which plays a really crucial role on the Synodal Way. But are they adequately reflected? I doubt it, and I think a lot of observers do.
Dr. Bunson, let's talk about the global church. What do the organizers of this synodal path plan to do when they're done? Is this only about the church in Germany?
Well, that's exactly right. From the very beginning of this discussion, and now we're into this synodal way in Germany, one of the questions that has been asked is it simply going to stay in Germany? The phrase that was used, in fact, by Michael Warsaw in the recent publisher's note to the National Catholic Register, is he describes it as a kind of theological virus. And so it is very likely that the results of these votes that they're going to be taking on church teaching as part of this synodal discussion in Germany they're going to be sent out across the world with the very clear aim of not just influencing national churches, but diocesan synods to sort of embrace this model of bringing in liberal democracy into the life of the church. But then I think we're also seeing their effort here to sort of tee up to influence the Synod of Bishops in October of 2022 that Pope Francis is convoking on a synod on synodality. So I think this has very wide ramifications.
And so how is this going to impact the Church of the United States specifically?
Well, when we began looking at the many details that were being discussed among the Germans for the Synodal Way, it was a kind of checklist of so many of the things that progressive Catholics have wanted for a number of decades. We think of the recent passing of the theologian Hans Küng, the Swiss theologian. These are things that he has been advocating or was advocating for a very long time. So what the Synodal path is very likely to do, with the real encouragement of the Central Committee of Catholics and the German synodal process, is to encourage Catholics here in the United States who want progressive changes, who want to unravel church teaching in a host of different ways. We're talking about human sexuality, we're talking about authority in the church, the ordination of women, that they want this to be the blueprint for what can happen here in the United States. And this is something I think that many German bishops are leery of, and certainly the U.S. bishops should be very concerned about as well.
Hans's legacy is one of great controversy going against many parts of church teaching. AC, is this something where you see the elite or the leadership of the church kind of casting out the desires and the beliefs of the people on the ground?
Certainly, Monsieur. I think those questions that were brought up by Father Küng, by others that are now being discussed in the Synodal Way, are exactly the topics that will be purportedly also, as Dr. Bunsen has said, distributed amongst the wider universal church. The elephant in the room here, of course, is the question of whether there is a schismatic tendency here or a real sort of disobedience of the Holy Father, which might be one qualification of it. And that's something we have yet to see. We have yet to see an actual response from Rome that goes beyond the rather serious, though I might add, interventions that both the Holy Father and several dicasteries have communicated rather clearly to Germany.
And Matthew, I'll ask you this about the U.S., and AC, I'll ask you about Germany. Is this something where the legalization of same-sex marriage throughout the world, we saw it in Canada first, then here in the U.S., where the secular governments are driving a change in church teaching?
Well, we're certainly seeing the influence of the world in the thinking of many of the theologians who are being used for the synodal path. We're seeing a similar approach. It is the embrace of liberal democracy, as I was saying. It is the secular idea of the same-sex marriage and a host of other things, including, we have to point out, abortion, contraception, euthanasia, all finding their way into key discussions, not just in Germany, but also in many theologates or many theological programs here in the United States. Bishops, again, are concerned about this, and I know the Holy Father is as well. He has spoken out very clearly, trying to divert this path on the part of the Germans, but this is something that he's going to have to weigh in again in dealing with this.
AC, do you feel the same way?
Couldn't agree more, to be frank. I think the other point to add is there is a certain element of financial issues here. The church in Germany, as I'm sure most of your viewers will know, is rather rich when it comes to material goods, thanks to the church tax being levied on people who are Catholic. And the reason for that is historical and is now up for discussion, as is the income that's connected to that. And a lot of the bishops and the further administration around them is worried that they might be seeing a loss of those funds if they do not embrace all those secular agendas, including a kind of homosexual marriage and things like that.
That is a very, very good note to end on. We'll be watching that carefully, as well as an upcoming segment on Vatican finances in the coming weeks. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. The top headlines next in the Week in Review.
American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration.
The president is also abandoning principles he's held for decades. Now he says your tax dollars should fund abortions. He's laying groundwork to pack the Supreme Court.
A country divided. Can the Democrats and Republicans come together? A faith response to the president's address to the joint session of Congress, next.
President Joe Biden's address to a joint session of Congress tops the Week in Review. With familiar themes, the president outlined his ambitious big government plan to rebuild America. Before a COVID-reduced gathering of just 200 lawmakers and guests, the president talked up his infrastructure proposal, which he calls the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. It would expand access to education and childcare, fund a federal paid leave program, provide free community college for all, and, he says, help Americans gain skills to build a middle-class lifestyle. The plan's $4 trillion price tag is steep. Mr. Biden said he would pay for it not by taxing the middle class, but by getting rid of corporate tax loopholes, raising taxes on the top 1/3 of 1% of Americans, and by clamping down on tax cheaters.
It's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. Trickle-down economics has never worked, and it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out.
The president also asked for Congress to pass a police reform bill within the month, by the anniversary of George Floyd's death, to help rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve. The lead Republican negotiator working to develop bipartisan police reform legislation gave the Republican response. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina called Biden's infrastructure proposal a liberal wish list of big government waste. He criticized the president for not working across the aisle on legislation and for not getting schools open more quickly.
But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. Our public schools should have reopened months ago. Other countries did. Private and religious schools did.
Scott said that failure is a clear argument for school choice, and he said that nowhere does America need common ground more than in our discussions about race and healing. We also wanted to hear how Democrats are reacting to President Biden's address. For that, we reached out to senior pastor at the Chicago Embassy Church Network, Chris Butler, who just announced his run for Congress as a Democrat in Illinois. Pastor Chris, thank you so much for being with us. Senator Tim Scott opened his response to the president's speech, claiming the Biden administration's policies are pulling us further apart. What was your reaction to that?
You know, I don't know that it's so much that the policies are pulling us apart. I think that a lot of the policies that we heard are vastly popular. You know, when you talk to Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, but we do need to begin to move toward a more unified conversation. And just like the president talked about, top-down economics are not going to work. Top-down coalition building is not going to work. We need folks at every level, from the grassroots to the Congress and up to the White House, they're going to get together, refuse to demonize each other, and really try to build coalition.
He also mentioned a litany of bills, including the Equality Act, which I know you've done a lot of work on, which could impact religious colleges and ministries such as the one that you work in. Mm-hmm. How should people of faith think about or approach the Equality Act?
You know, it's very unfortunate that our party continues to set up a false choice on this issue. It's not like you only have one way forward on this. There is a bill that is the result of the kind of compromise that we all want to see. It's called Fairness for All. It would protect LGBT folks and give them the extension of civil rights that we're looking for, while maintaining and protecting communities of faith and giving folks the freedom to believe in this country. So this is a false binary that we're setting up when we say Equality Act or nothing. We can come together and get this done.
And is it just the freedom to believe, or is it the freedom to form, to act, and to do things in your community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, for so many folks like myself all over this country, there is no separation between those two things. And that's why it's so important that we find a real way forward here. Because if you tell me that I can't form, that I can't worship, that I can't serve the community, that I can't study at a faith university, then that's actually hampering my freedom to believe, because you can't separate my faith from those actions. You know, the scriptures tell us that, show me your faith without actions, and I'm going to show you my faith by what I do.
Do you see, on another issue, the issue of justice and police reform, do you see a path forward with what Senator Tim Scott said and what the Biden administration wants to do?
Listen, here's what I know, is that we have to find in communities all over this country, like the south side of Chicago, where I'm from, we have to find a way for communities to heal. And that means that folks who serve these communities in law enforcement and the community members themselves have to find a way to come together. We have to do that. I think we can do that if we refuse to demonize folks who may not see things just the way that we do, and really get in the room and start having real conversation.
Really quick, as a pastor, do you feel particularly called to lead that conversation?
I do. Pastor, I think conversations around healing is something that I'm called to lead. And as somebody who's been working on issues of justice since I was 12 years old, I feel called in that way also to help lead on these issues. And I've been doing that. I mean, we've worked together with law enforcement before to create community-based safety strategies and public safety strategies. And I think that we can do that at scale if we just have leadership at every level of government that refuses to play the game of division and demonization that really just leaves us stuck at the status quo.
Thank you so much, Pastor Chris. We'll be watching your candidacy. Thank you. Pope Francis has named a new bishop for President Biden's hometown diocese, the Diocese of Wilmington, Delaware. The Reverend Monsignor Willem Koenig will replace Bishop Francis Milouli in July. At a Friday press conference, Koenig was asked about the president's receiving of communion in the diocese. There has been discussions among the bishops about whether that should continue, since the president takes a pro-abortion political stance. Koenig said he has never met the president. He prays for him every day and is called to teach the fullness and the beauty of the Catholic faith. He says he looks forward to having a conversation with the president. EWTN News in Depth will be keeping an eye on the latest developments. The political landscape is changing for both Democrats and Republicans alike as the results of the 2020 census are released. New numbers equal redistricting. The population grew at the smallest rate since the 1930s, and the census shows white Americans are aging and having fewer children. The most growth is in communities of color. That translates into changes in the number of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. The states in green are all adding one member. Texas gets 2 more, while the states in red are each losing 1 representative. The shift is expected to benefit Republicans. Census totals will also allow states to draw new district boundaries, also a net plus for Republicans. The U.S. has formally recognized the first mass killing of the 20th century as genocide. Last Saturday, Armenian leaders observed Genocide Remembrance Day, marking the beginning of the killings during World War I of 1.5 million Armenians at the hands of the Ottoman Turks. Turkey, the modern-day successor of the Ottoman Empire, has long denied the killings were part of a plan to erase the Armenian population. But President Biden became the first U.S. leader to risk alienating Turkey when he formally joined 30 other countries in acknowledging the atrocities. Record numbers of COVID deaths are devastating India as a second wave of coronavirus has swept through the country. Cremation is an important part of the Hindu funeral rite, and crematoriums are having great difficulty meeting the demand. Funeral pyres now burn through the night and still can't keep up. A priest at the largest Catholic hospital in New Delhi told the Catholic News Service, "This disaster is beyond the imagination." Pope Francis begins a month-long prayer marathon for the end of the COVID-19 pandemic this weekend. The Pope's Rosary will be broadcast live at 6 p.m. Rome time on Saturday. His involvement kicks off a month of daily rosaries prayed at Catholic shrines around the world for the intention of an end to the pandemic and a resumption of work and social activities. And at least a partial return to normal here in the U.S. This week, the Centers for Disease Control announced those fully vaccinated against COVID no longer need to wear masks outdoors while walking, running, hiking, or biking in small groups. Masks will still be required at large outdoor venues like sports stadiums and concerts. The CDC said fully vaccinated people wearing masks may also resume many indoor activities, including safely attending inside worship services. Several Catholic colleges will require COVID vaccinations for students this fall as universities move toward reopening. Those schools include Georgetown University, Holy Cross College, the University of Notre Dame, and Fordham, to name a few. Some schools are providing vaccinations on campus. Campus leaders say most students have indicated they're on board with receiving the shot. Catholic universities and other religious schools face a legal challenge from the LGBTQ community. When we come back, we'll explain and talk to the presidents of 2 Catholic colleges to figure out what that could mean for Catholic education and college life. The U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights has announced a comprehensive review of its Title IX regulations. It's part of a Biden administration plan to eliminate gender-based discrimination in higher education. At the same time, a lawsuit has been filed challenging a Title IX religious exemption. All of this activity has religious-based colleges and universities on alert. Reporter Kate Scanlon explains.
What's going to be coming forward is still, I think, very much an unknown.
Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 prohibits federally funded colleges from discriminating against students on the basis of sex. The provision was designed to correct inequalities in women's athletics, but applies to other areas of student life as well, such as codes of conduct. Attorney Farnaz Thompson explains that there is an exemption to Title IX for religious institutions.
Those educational institutions don't have to comply with Title IX to the extent that the organization's religious tenets conflict with Title IX.
But the exemption has recently come under fire. A group called the Religious Exemption Accountability Project filed a federal lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Education, alleging that students at more than 20 schools face discrimination on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. All of the schools named in the suit are associated with evangelical denominations or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. None are Catholic. The class action lawsuit states that LGBT students at religious colleges experience higher rates of harassment, bullying, depression, and violence than their peers. The lawsuit asks the court to declare the exemption unconstitutional in its entirety. Ryan Bangert of Alliance Defending Freedom says the lawsuit could have a dramatic impact on religious schools.
These schools have historically required their students to follow codes of conduct, and those codes of conduct have been informed by those schools' faith.
Those codes of conduct, Bangert says, often prohibit sex outside of a traditional marriage.
This lawsuit seeks to make the mere act of following that historical understanding an act of illegal discrimination.
ADF filed a motion to intervene in the lawsuit on behalf of 3 Christian schools seeking to defend the exemption. Belmont Abbey College, a Catholic school in North Carolina, is not named in the lawsuit, but it does have a religious exemption. Its president, Dr. William Thielfelder, says that exemption is necessary.
We can't go there. We're not going to go there. And so we would be in a hard situation. We'd have the federal government telling us we need to do it. We'd be saying we can't based on our deeply held religious convictions and beliefs.
He says the exemption helps religious colleges authentically practice their faith. And if the lawsuit is successful, Belmont Abbey would likely end up in court.
We do stand for something. We have a reason why we stand for it, and that we have these, again, deeply held religious convictions and beliefs. And we're happy to express that and discuss that with anybody that would like to.
Thompson says that as the lawsuit progresses, religious colleges should clearly communicate their policies and make sure they apply them evenly.
So, for example, if a religious school is going to prohibit extramarital sex, then that religious school should treat homosexual extramarital sex the same as heterosexual extramarital sex.
I reached out to the Department of Education, and a spokesperson said the Biden-Harris administration and the Office for Civil Rights is fully committed to equal educational access for all students. From Washington, Kate Scanlon, EWTN News, in depth.
To give us a better understanding of what this could mean for Catholic higher education, we're joined by the presidents of 2 leading Catholic schools on opposite coasts in the United States, the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and Thomas Aquinas College in Santa Paula, California. We begin with President John Garvey of the Catholic University of America. President Garvey, you're an expert in the Constitution. Why is the religious exemption for religious colleges and universities so important?
Hi, Monty. It's nice to see you. It's important to us, first of all, because our job is to educate our students to lead lives of virtue. And among the things that we want to tell them is how they should appropriately live their lives. But obviously, the kinds of things that we're having discussions about now bear on the actions that we've got to perform as a university, and we don't want to send signals that are contrary to the faith we're trying to teach our students.
That's really important. And from a constitutional perspective, is it legal for the government to take away an exemption like this?
It would be. That's an interesting question. The lawsuit says that the government is forbidden to allow an exemption like this? And I think that's a fairly easy question. I think the Constitution protects the free exercise of religion, and the government certainly may allow an exception, as it does to Title IX. In fact, I would go farther and say that the government, in many cases, would be required to allow an exemption. That's an issue that's before the court in another case that will be decided this term, Fulton against the city of Philadelphia.
That's a really important case that we're watching very carefully. Is it true, and this is it's not a hypothetical question, I know you deal with this all the time, is it true that this claim that students around the country say that LGBTQ students don't feel welcome or safe on religious campuses, is that true for you?
I don't believe it is. It's an empirical question, of course, and it's important for us at Catholic University to send the kinds of messages, to do the sort of teaching that we're doing here consistent with what the Catholic Church teaches. And the Church teaches that discrimination against gays and lesbians is wrong for all of us. And so I think on our campus, when we ask students to come as freshmen, we have a sort of pledge that the freshmen take that they won't discriminate against others on campus, including people on account of their sexual orientation. That's a different matter from requiring that we observe the sorts of rules that the Supreme Court has put in place for in Bostock last year. I mean, for example, we don't want to have men living in the same rooms as young women. We don't want to have biological males playing on our female sports teams. We don't want to be the ones who are through our health plan paying for gender transition surgery. There are actions that we ourselves wouldn't take, but that's a different thing from discriminating against our students, and we want to send the message that all our students are children of God and welcome here.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, President Garvey.
Thank you. It's always nice to see you, Monsi.
Joining us next is Dr. Michael Mclean, president of Thomas Aquinas College in California. Dr. Mclean, thanks for taking the time to weigh in here. Although Catholics are not named in this lawsuit, this affects Thomas Aquinas College, right?
I think it certainly does, Monte. Like President Garvey said, our religious convictions are very important to us, and we really have put together our rules of residence in a way that manifests Catholic teaching on sexuality and gender, and we feel that as a Catholic institution, we have every right to do that and to model and encourage our students in the acquisition of Christian virtue.
Is that what makes a Catholic university different? Is that why you need a religious exemption?
I think it is. In this day and age, with the challenges that secular culture is presenting, I think it's very important for Catholic institutions and religious institutions generally to be confident and upfront about their convictions and to model those convictions in their rules of residence and their guidelines they offer to the students.
Are these values that you think minority students are interested in? Is that why they come to your university?
I think our students come to our college, of course, first of all, for the quality of our educational program, but our Catholic commitment is central to our mission and central to what draws students to us. And I think they really do appreciate the kind of moral and spiritual community we have formed here on our campus at Thomas Aquinas College, and I think that's a big attraction for many of our students.
On Wednesday night, President Biden said that he wanted to expand Pell Grants, but also to see the Equality Act passed. And if passed, the Equality Act would force religious universities to forsake their religious mission in order to receive federal funds. Would that force you to change your mission or your beliefs?
No, we would never, I think, change our mission or beliefs in response to something like that. Frankly, the direction we might go in would be to move away from federal funding and find other sources of funds to replace what federal funding we receive. As a matter of fact, the only federal funding we receive are federally subsidized student loans, which historically have been understood to be aid to the student and not, strictly speaking, aid to the college. And some of our students do receive Pell Grants or, in California, Cal Grants. So if the Biden administration were to pass regulations or legislation that required us to give up the federal funding, that's a direction we would go in.
Well, we'll be watching this carefully, and we'll come to you for an update when we know more.
For me, I would go crazy if I didn't trust God. Like, I have to believe that what he's saying and what he's doing in my life is for a purpose.
A conversion to Catholicism, a vision for raising her children, and a mission to teach the story of America's first saint. A very personal faith journey when we come back.
She's a great one in the annals of Catholic history, the first American to be canonized, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. She founded our nation's first congregation of religious sisters and established the country's parochial school system. And she's been an inspiration for generations of faithful. Reporter Mark Irons introduces us to a woman who works to keep the saint's memory alive every day. He takes us to Emmitsburg, Maryland, where she shared her faith journey in depth.
Untying her own history, Lisa Donahue says letter writing leaves a precious record of the correspondence between her family and friends.
It just makes me remember how much I love those people.
Lisa has been writing to loved ones for years, but the practice took on new meaning when she began learning more about St. Elizabeth Ann Seton.
She wrote letters all the time.
Seton was the first American to be canonized a saint. She founded the Sisters of Charity in 1809. They began their missionary work here in Emmitsburg, Maryland, where Lisa works at the National Shrine of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, educating visitors about the life of Mother Seton, who in turn has taught her.
She lived every day. She had the anxieties and the fears and the grief and all of those things, and she survived it.
That speaks to Lisa, who has overcome a lot in her own life. She didn't grow up in a religious household. There was family tension, and Lisa describes her childhood as toxic.
I was very shy, and I didn't have that place of peace.
But in high school, friends invited Lisa to Mass. She began to feel at home in the Catholic Church, and she eventually converted.
I started down that road to become Catholic, and that's when I met my husband, who comes from this great Catholic family, and I was just able to fit right into that.
It was Lisa's mother-in-law who provided a piece of advice that has stuck with her for years.
Don't make your faith just on Sundays. Live it every day.
She's carried that into her own family life.
So for my kids, I've just tried to always teach them to be good people. So we started very young with them helping at the church and helping other people and always trying to put other people first. Everybody up, 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 up.
At the National Shrine, Lisa teaches girls about St. Elizabeth Ann Seton and life in the early 19th century as part of a living history program.
She's really easy to talk to. She's taught us everything we know.
And Lisa keeps learning lessons in faith from the saint she looks up to as her own children become adults.
That's another way I think I relate to Mother Seton. You know, she worried about her son William going in the Navy and not keeping the faith, but you just kind of sometimes have to trust God, and I'm trying really hard to do that.
Living Catholic for Lisa means communicating care for others every day, spreading the faith, and believing when life is difficult, God has a purpose.
Sometimes we have to go through the tough things to learn a lesson, because we just won't learn it otherwise.
Lessons from the past can provide comfort, and Lisa says she finds a source of peace here on the cemetery grounds at the Elizabeth Ann Seton National Shrine, learning about the lives of those who lived the faith before her.
They have the same issues that we have today. They're dealing with life and death. They're dealing with money issues and problems with family members and children or spouses or whatever, and they're making it through.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in depth.
Thank you, Lisa, for trusting us with your story. And now we're excited to share our image of the week with our first photo submission from you, our viewers. More than 130 years ago, the Great Flood of Johnstown, Pennsylvania killed more than 2,000 people. It wiped out homes, businesses, and churches and caused millions of dollars in property damage. This Marian statue miraculously survived, despite the church around it being badly damaged. The statue of the Blessed Virgin remained undisturbed, though marks on the church walls show the water level rose above the statue. Parishioners who saw the Mother Mary statue amid the devastation and rubble were convinced it was saved by a miracle. She now stands as a sign of resilience and hope at Resurrection Roman Catholic Church in Johnstown. Thanks to Steve Riesbeck, who sent us that picture depicting a statue that is very important to the members of his parish. Now, we want to see more Catholic images from around the country that touch your life. So send an email and attach either still photography or video to indepth@EWTN News. You can also submit your images via Facebook Messenger or Twitter direct message. And remember, there's lots more to see from EWTN News in Depth. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Montse Alvarado, and thank you for watching EWTN News in Depth. Next week, a special tribute to mothers in all forms as we celebrate Mother's Day weekend. See you then, same time next week.